Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to an impromptu stream that was kind of chucked together at the last second because of a video that's just been released by the academic agent called an impromptu stream. Sorry, excuse me. I'm chucked together at the last second because of accidentally got my own stream going in the background. Okay, called Final Thoughts on Positive Visions, and also to an extent his other video which kind of kicked this all off, which is called A Positive Vision for the Right ? I'm joined this evening by Charlemagne. Good evening.
Hello. Good afternoon for me.
Well, good afternoon for you. We haven't really interacted. I don't think we've spoken together on a stream before, have we?
Certainly not like this. Maybe indirectly, hosted by someone else. Sure. Probably by academic agent, if so. But yeah, I don't think we've ever actually talked.
Indeed. So just for the sake of potentially my audience who might not necessarily have heard of you, just kind of lay out your general position.
I mean, my general position, I guess, is, well, do you mean in regards to the positive vision or just me generally?
Just you in general.
Yeah, okay. So I would describe myself as neo-reactionary. That's a label you can use on me if you want. I tend to not use the ists labels or isms too much because I don't view myself as like constraining myself to some like particular ideology super hardcore, right? So what I mean by this is I don't like take Curtis Yarvin's or Nick Land's work as gospel or something, but I'm generally aligned with that, which is essentially a neo-monarchist position. You can which is essentially to say you can think of neo-monarchist as like you can use the word dictator, you could use the word chief executive officer, you can use the word monarch, in the sense that we have this problem where the government is run by this extremely corrupt oligarchy, and we're supposed to have a democratic system, right? And the solution that's basically outlined by Curtis Yarvin to this problem is to use the remaining democratic power we have to actually elect a real executive to essentially dissolve the oligarchy, reconstitute the government in a new form, which might not necessarily be a pure monarchy, right? The monarchy, it would be like a potentially transitionary phase to the next form. So I guess I see us as being in a position where the U.S. government in particular, because most other Western governments are like imperial provinces of that, they really need to be restructured from the ground up, where we ditch concepts of like common law, separation of powers, basically everything we know about government. And not that we won't use that past knowledge, but the entire frame must go, and it must be restructured with a clear, constrained vision. And that kind of vision can really only come from a unified executive. An oligarchy can't really produce it. So before we, without going too further into that, that's kind of my general view.
Cool. Thanks for that. So yeah, you're a reformer kind of first and foremost.
I wouldn't say reformer. I would say restorationist or restructurist. Restructuring. Reform implies, I think, to me, a sort of working within the system, whereas basically the person who wants a restructuring wants to just basically control, alt, delete, remove the system and start completely afresh. So it's different from reform in that way, whereas reform is incremental.
Okay, yeah. So the video which has kind of brought us together for this stream, which I suppose kicks off, it's really a trio of videos. He did do A Positive Vision for the Right. He then did an analysis of Mr. Topsy-Turvy, and then has done a Final Thoughts on Positive Visions. And really, this entire trilogy can be summed up by his kind of mission statement, as he put it in the Positive Vision for the Right, which is his idea of a positive vision is to build a self-sustaining local community with traditional values. And then he goes out and lays out that vision, which is primarily an anti-technology vision. It's essentially you buy a village somewhere, everyone moves in who agrees with his particular vision. Everyone has a much more assigned role. It's much more locally based, much more community based. In fact, forcibly community based, in a sense that he wants to ban things like the internet, television, radio, that sort of thing, aside from presumably a form of local radio. And then to have, I mean, he wants it to essentially create a world apart from the globalized system that we currently live in. You know, where that might take place, he doesn't really describe. It's all fictionalized, but that's the long and short of it.
That's a good sentence, really quick. That's a good sentence or wording you just used right there. The idea of being a world apart of the globalist system. My view is a world in place of the globalist system. So you see, maybe you can see the difference there, where it's not, to me, the positive vision we want isn't an enclave within the global order. It's an actual replacement of the global order. But anyway, continue.
Sure. It's not, when I say forced, it's more enforced, right? So let's say that we are in his system right now, because I'm seeing some of the criticism in the chat right now. When he talks about, let's say that we have a group of people who move, who are really in tune with this particular vision and how they want to live. They decide that they want to sit there. And then we get 2 or 3 generations down the line, and almost sort of the greatest contemporary, I suppose, for this, you might describe as like the Amish community seems to come to mind, right?
Yeah, although I think they do have cell phones even, and I'm pretty sure they also will use modern hospital services if there's an emergency. We would have to look into that, but I think that's a good analogy. I've seen people mention the Mennonites as well, but I do not know enough about them to comment on that.
Well, he mentioned things like rejecting large-scale farming equipment and stuff like that as well. So that's also why it kind of came to mind. To kind of break away from the specific vision, I feel like he's, as in the specific vision he laid out, I feel like he's tiptoeing around this idea of the idyllic community, right? It's potentially what he considers to be it. Although it is important to note that it's not something that he personally would go and live in. He describes himself as a subversive in that regard, and that he wouldn't necessarily be able to kind of cope with it.
I don't remember if he said that specifically about this positive vision, but I mean, that's consistent with things he said in the past, and I've kind of taken that up as well. I mean, I would also subvert it.
I think, I mean, he was talking about this several months ago in terms of what do we construe as freedom, because kind of total freedom is kind of anarchy. There's no rule of law. There's no kind of constraints on human behavior, which he seems to have recognized is, that's an untenable position in many ways. We have to have certain touch points of consistency across all of our society in order to maintain some kind of, at least some kind of cultural homogeneity from time to time, and security is important. But he's taken this idea to the point where I consider it to be, I think he's tiptoeing around the idea of the exemplary community, right? So in the most charitable sense, if this came to be, it would become, he's basically trialing a model for living. And if he trials that successfully, then it's something that other people will see and either want to emulate, or that people will want to move to, and therefore it will kind of grow exponentially from there. Because otherwise, I look at it and I go, this is not something that is going to survive, especially because the only constant in life is change, right?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I kind of, I'm probably about 80% there with the general framework he laid out, but my core problems are really the level of resolution. I think it's too large to start with and inactionable. And I don't view this, as I said, this community, as stated, would be basically embedded within some existing sovereign power like the US or UK, but at least in the global system. And I don't really view it as being capable of surviving for its anti-technology stance, and also just its economic model. I mean, I think it would be great if we could not have to compete, right? But the fact is, you actually do have to compete. And when feudal societies like this, or feudal light, maybe in this case, actually existed, that was like the cutting edge of human development, right? But now, so everything was feudal, like in Europe. But now it's not that way. Now it's like you'd have a tiny feudal enclave necessarily in competition with everyone else in the world. This is just reality, right? And like you need to do some trade for materials at least with other parts of the world. But how would you do that? What would your export be, right? Like if you don't have if it's a very carrot pill, we can say, oriented community or civilization where a lot of what you're doing is agriculture by hand necessarily for banning large scale manufacturing equipment. I mean, how are you even going to export food, right? Because you're going to be striving to feed yourself. I mean, if you know anything about, I've been looking into this a little bit because it's going to impact me soon, most hopefully. You need actually a good bit of land just to feed a single person. And there's some efficiency if you're feeding a family, right? But you actually need a good bit of acreage to feed people consistently. So any such community would have to be of significant scale, and most of that would just be on subsistence, right? So I think there's a survival problem here in how this thing remains.
Sure. I mean, speaking of survival, I mean, two or three really big points come out. The first is who's going to move to this, and what's the ratio of men to women going to be like? Right. So even if he could get, I mean, I was looking around just because it was amusing rather than other. I was like, can you buy a town, right, or the land to build one on?
Definitely, you can.
And even looking in this country, because it's more viable in parts of America, but in the UK certainly, I mean, there are parts of Wales you can buy. I mean, you could buy. I mean, they call it a town. It's more of a hamlet, barely a village, for maybe £1.5 million or whatever. But you're looking at maybe 200 people or something like that. So unless you can get that and it's all families or 50-50 men and women or whatever it happens to be in similar distribution, you've then also got the incest problem. Are you going to allow people to breed outside of your community? Are you going to allow people to come in, etc.? Then you've got the subsistence farming. Unless every single person there who has been kind of either formally or informally trained on how to support themselves, we don't exactly have a society which is promoting subsistence right at the moment.
According to his model, though, I mean, there'd be a division of labor, so you would get efficiency in that regard. So I would assume that the farmland would basically be all contiguous, and it would be farmed by the agricultural guild and the members of that who inherit that position from their fathers, right? And that their job would basically to feed the whole community, and other people would do like smithing and stuff. So we would also eke out some efficiency from that. I think he mentioned something like 30,000 people at some point as like a target goal. And for that, I think you would need about 150 square miles, which I think is about a third of the whole space of London. I was looking this up to actually.
He's effectively proposing a micro country, right?
Yes, which it's interesting because this is actually similar to the whole Ancap Island Prospera project, right? But it becomes viable there because you're actually trying to become pseudo-sovereign or ultimately inch your way into sovereignty, as opposed to just remain embedded in like your existing country. I think that's sort of the core problem. Like if you actually took this particular project and you were able to actually just purchase some land, say an island, and actually be a sovereign entity, then you would potentially have more capacity to actually do it. But I view the sovereignty issue as a pretty big deal when doing this kind of stuff, because we say he proposed since when's the last time China invaded any place, or who's going to invade it? I mean, the USA finds reasons all the time to invade things like this, like Ruby Ridge and Waco. And okay, you can say, yeah, those are like weird cultish things, but I mean, how do you think this would be viewed, right? So like they actually do bother to ruin you if you make plans like this on any significant scale. So like, how's that going to be taken into account?
and I'm thinking UK wise in particular. I can't remember what it was called, what city it was. Maybe it was Bristol, who had the Bristol Dollar, right, which is like an alternative currency which could only be spent in the local community. Or Bristol pounds even. Goodness me, that's what speaking to an American gets me. But it's just not something which ends up being all too viable when you have another currency which, essentially is competing in that way and is already well established in terms of fiat. But also, it's important to note that he is talking about a positive vision because we focus too much on ideas and not enough on solutions. And the idea that you can convince 30,000 people, let's just say in the UK, that they should move out to the middle of a country where they have no kind of practical skills in terms of looking after themselves, and to set up a business with no guarantee of success for a currency which they haven't used before, and that this is all going to work out marvelously, and also no one's going to disrupt it, seems to me to be quite ludicrous.
Well, I think, like I said, the problem is it's starting at way too high of a level of resolution. I mean, I think his analysis should basically just be shrunk down to the, or I guess a higher resolution of the family, right? Basically, this whole Trumptonshire idea should really just be contracted all the way down to the individual family or family group level, and not this like large scale township, because it's fine to have this as like a piece of the continuing vision, but I think we need to actually approach the problem of positive vision from immediate actionable steps. Because if you look at Trumptonshire, it's like, my main problem is, and this is something Yarvin wrote down in his recent post on the Great Reset, or the Real Great Reset, is that basically what you shouldn't be doing is getting right-wingers to piss away their precious energy on useless activities, which
sure
without a plan to get to Trumptonshire, like in concrete steps, all I can imagine is that you would necessarily be like wasting your energy.
So I have been giving this some thought, because it is the topic of my talk at the event, which is coming up. I believe there are some discounted tickets still available if you're interested in going to that at the end of the month. But this idea of authenticity, and I kind of look back towards my let's take my parents, for instance, who I was raised in a Christian tradition, and my parents certainly didn't take the path of least resistance with regards to a lot of this stuff. There were a lot of personal restrictions that were put on me, but also a lot of really kind of positive moral framing. And one of the things which was always kind of beaten into us was this idea of one of the Christian verses, which is that no one ever came to the Father except through me, right? Which comes from the New Testament. And whilst on the face of it, this seems like a purely religious verse, it's Jesus talking about how you can only get to the Almighty through him. You've also got this element of the fact that you can't just convince people, so to speak, through fact, reason, logic, whatever, of your particular worldview, of your particular positive vision. It's just not possible. To a lesser extent, it is possible through child rearing, and as you say, the family unit, because children take a lot of their moral values from their parents, and as well as the wider community. And one of the things that we've really seen eroded over the past 50 years is the impact of the family on this, and the kind of expropriation of the family's responsibilities onto the state. So one of the things that you need to do is you need to impress a positive vision on the personal level, where you are behaving in such a way that people are interested in how your way of living is making a positive impact on not just yourself and your family, but on the wider community around you. It requires you to be kind of open and honest and truthful, and to be quite twee, to have an attitude, a loving attitude as well to all of the different things that you're engaging in your life, and spending our time as we are preoccupied with hatred and ratios on Twitter. It doesn't really, this is not a way to, I mean, completely disengaging from that is part of the process, but it doesn't mean that we need to throw away the tools that technology provides in order to achieve that. I think that's ludicrous as well, and is also going to limit our reach in terms of, providing a positive vision to people who are currently trapped, miserable, and they don't know why, and they're looking for reasons.
Yeah, well, I don't even think it's a matter of could or should. I mean, I think the technological problem is the reality of the situation is just technology is not going away, and I think it would be unprecedented to get the entire global order to sort of technologically regress, which would ultimately be necessary, right? Because we have the whole AI and gray goo and whatnot problems. I mean, someone's going to be developing this stuff, and if you just abstain from it, if you're not participating in technology, well, someone else is just going to get it.
Well, and to bolster that point, that is what is happening in some regards with the climate change movement. So many of the kind of the people who would be developing new technologies in this country and in the US are being basically bought by China, because we have so many restrictions on what you can do, and people also don't necessarily want to do it over here because it's not seen as as sustainable or in line with the green agenda and that sort of thing. So it's a kind of, the climate change activists want to kind of forced regression, right? They want us to abandon fossil fuels, even though renewable technologies, for instance, aren't ready, shall we say, to compete on a market level and require all of this bolstering, which just isn't happening in a positive way at the moment.
And of course, that's why we're not really using it at all, except in a few, or even more. We're using it in more than a few cases, the green technology, but it's nowhere near actually replacing the existing stuff because, of course, it can't. And we can also look at the Cold War. I mean, obviously, everyone wanted to get rid of nuclear weapons, right, to put the genie back in the bottle. But of course, that didn't happen. It's not going to happen. It can't happen. And I think also, the idea that like technological advancement is somehow a new thing. Well, I don't actually agree with this perspective. I mean, yes, technological advancement is much faster now, especially in certain domains. But anytime innovations occurred in the past, if those innovations were useful and other people learned about them, I mean, then they were applied. I mean, this is how agriculture gets invented, the wheel. I mean, at what point do you stop the technology? You just stop at computers, maybe?
Maybe he's decided that enough is enough. We've developed as far as we should technologically, and Trumpton in its, I can't remember if it was 70s, 80s or whatever, that level of technology was clearly the best. We must return to this, because at that point, nothing needs to be developed at that point.
Yeah, and I think this sort of gets into the stagnation problem too. I mean, I think the static nature of Trumpton, although I think slow growth is admitted, I mean, to me, this kind of runs into the whole problem of the circulation of the elite and keeping the society healthy in general. I mean, I had it confirmed for me as well. I mean, the Amish apparently can actually use a lot of modern technology, just with certain limitations, like things like buttons are banned. Like if you know anything about like Jewish law, right? There's some like weird restrictions, but there are like ways around them. So that's apparently how the Amish work. But yeah, I think the idea of technological regression is very unlikely to even be possible. And even if it was at a localized level, even if you could like become like pseudo Amish or whatever, to me that's a very bad condition. I mean, if getting rid of technology were good at the answer, why don't we just destroy our computers and whatnot that we're talking on literally right now? I think it's because we see there's utility for what we're trying to do in these things.
I know a lot of people, particularly on the left, interestingly, who are rejecting the kind of technocracy level. They don't like the idea of, they will say, they're in favor of globalism, et cetera, but they don't like the fact that Amazon suddenly starts owning everything, right? AA in the comments here has said law is the product of tiny elites and culture is downstream from law and that sort of thing. But his argument is that he should create a new micro community which has its own system of elites, essentially, that he has either pre-selected or that the trouble is, like, who do you trust to select your elites? And again, this is one of those big issues with any form of central planning exercise in essence, which is what he is proposing. He's basically pointing out that he's like, well, we'll have this enforced period, this kind of temporary period where we establish the elites and I choose everything.
I think that's good for you to bring up, because this idea that basically that everything is just top down. I mean, he seems to be suggesting that things are essentially just purely top down, but this perspective is really confusing me, because in the stuff we've been reading a lot lately, like Burnham points this out when he's analyzing Pareto, is that things are fundamentally top down from the elite downwards, but it's not entirely that. I mean, there's actually a relationship from the bottom up. I mean, one of the key ways that elites circulate is that there are organized minority groups that back elites that rise within them, and then these people use their, essentially that democratic power. It could be financial power or just, the raw muscle power, perhaps in older times when, something like street fighting would be applicable. This is actually how the relationship works, right? And the bottom part, the masses, they need to actually think that the elite are doing something for them that is in their interest that they want.
If we go back to the kind of feudal-esque system that we're talking about, there's a prevailing attitude of quote unquote your betters, shall we say? This idea that that you will have someone who is the master, essentially, in society, and that is a natural order, and that you should be permissive of this. And whilst there is strength to the kind of consistency that brings, I mean, he wants a single point of failure, which is the mayor, essentially, this kind of pseudo monarch, and that also runs into the issues of like all things tending towards failure in the long run. I mean, if we take under a democratic capitalist system, how the top 5%, just in terms of wealth, for instance, exists, within 3 generations, that usually is gone. It's a very transitory position. It's very easy to lose that position, and you run into the issues which come with monarchy as well, which I'm sure you're well aware of. Like, even advocating for something to that with that regard is that if one bad choice in terms of a successor can lead to a generation of difficulty, shall we say.
Well, I'm not actually sure that the mayor even is a pseudo monarch. I mean, I'm not actually even clear on what the form of government is in this particular positive vision. To me, it almost seems like a dictatorships of the customs and imports department, basically.
Well, he talks. I mean, again, this is the trouble of academia, as far as I'm aware, and he's welcome to correct me if I'm wrong. But he doesn't really. I don't think he appreciates what actually goes into maintaining a community, especially of a size that he's talking as well.
Yeah, I mean, 30,000 people. That's
like local town councils. Like, what's going on even at that level?
Well, especially if we're going to say culture is downstream from law. I mean, what is the law? I mean, the law isn't just words that you write down in a video, right? Like, there's a system there that actually has to work some way, and people, like I said, people do actually need to feel that it's benefiting with them somehow. I mean, that's the whole reason our entire countercultural movement that we're participating in right now exists, right? That it's because we don't feel that the elite are actually serving our interests. And there's substantial efforts being made. I mean, if you look at how much like someone like Curtis Yarvin, who's being popularized right now, I see like R.N. McIntyre's account has took off, and I see like Michael Anton's talking to Tucker Carlson, and Carlson like actually mentions Yarvin. I mean, this is actually happening, right? So the masses have to really believe to some extent that the elite are operating in their interest, and if they don't believe that to a certain extent, they're going to rebel. And I mean, when you're so exclusionary towards technology in particular, especially since modern people know about technology, I mean, how is anyone going to actually, how is anyone actually going to feel that this society is in their interest, right? If you just kind of spawned it in right now, like, would you move there? I mean, well, no. I mean, I'd consider moving there, I guess, if it was, like I said, completely sovereign. But the problem is it's still just subject to all of the law of the land we live in. So you don't even really have real law, right? I mean, to some extent, you might have corporate law, and I'm not even sure if it would be legal to set up the type of corporate law that is proposed here, whatever it is. So there's all sorts of problems with how this system is actually supposed to function and appeal to people, because it must appeal to people for people to join it. And I think a lot of people might, even if you actually try this experiment, like if you could somehow pull it off, you might get a lot of people who actually signed up, and then you would have a lot of exit, because I think people would realize that, this actually kind of sucks. And, for all the ills of the modern world, you'd kind of rather just go do your own thing. I mean, like instead of joining this community, you could just go, homestead or something. Like, take a look at Luke Smith's channel, right? And he has, his own like satellite internet hooked up, and is living like homestead life that I think is really interesting. I mean, a lot of people are doing this. So it's like, when you can do that and get your spiritual fulfillment and, even have community, like, why would you join the feudalism light village that just sort of removes all these things? I mean, if you would sign up for this thing, right, I would think you're the kind of person who has the self-control and discipline to just do this on your own anyway, in a situation that is more amenable to your specific case. So it's hard for me to imagine how this would
the thing he's missing, he wants to create something where people are rooted, right? So you're kind of locked to, you have to engage, right? Because you're contained there. I mean, even in the kind of the kind of environment that he's talking about, like, people were still free to kind of come and go. But he lays out this kind of structure of the corporation, and again, this seems to me to be like kind of slightly off the cuff, but he wants a mayor, he wants the captain of the guard, a chief of police, a treasurer, head of customs, head of capital controls, head of business permits, and the head of immigration control. And he has this mayoral position, which has this sort of, you choose your successor, so there's always that kind of, hopefully, consistency in terms of that, like the CEO who chooses his successor there. But with all of these other positions as well, like how you end up not running into the same issues of like burgeoning bureaucracy that basically come when, because he lays out the way he wants the spend distributed, right? Like a flat 10% tax rate, a 33% spend on defense, 16.5% on the fire service, admin, the police, and top brass salaries. But like, what happens with, as you say, like a couple of generations down the line, where people are basically moving around, like, these budgets can't just be so static either. And it might seem like minutia, but it kind of exposes this idea of like, not everything fits so neatly into little boxes when you try and make this stuff happen.
Well, what I see a lot too is I think people really underestimate what goes into advanced materials manufacturing. If you're going to have your defenses, right? I mean, are you going to have tanks? Are you going to have aircraft? I mean, are you going to presumably you won't be building these things because everyone will have
everyone will have muskets, Charlemagne.
Yeah,
Everyone
so at that point, it's like, well, why even have a defense force, right? That's kind of like the whole Second Amendment thing, right? The Second Amendment, a bunch of Americans having guns doesn't really do anything, right? I mean, it's like the most minor deterrent at best. I mean, I guess at least Trumptonshire would be like an actual militia, right? But like, again, it's like, how are you even going to buy one F-15, right? Which is already outdated. I mean, can you buy an F-15 on Trumpton's budget? I mean, how's that going to work? I mean, if you don't have in the modern world, if you don't have air superiority, I mean, you're screwed. I mean, can you even buy a single modern tank for Trumptonshire? I mean, I mean, certainly couldn't manufacture one.
Aside from the idea of purchasing things for national level defense, I think it's important to point out that whilst law, like AA said earlier, that culture is downstream of law, but law is also downstream of culture. I mean, he himself has pointed out, what seems like a silly frivolity, which is, do you take the shopping cart back to the shopping cart sort of storage area because you are compelled to, because there's like a pound that you have to get back out of it, or because it's the right thing to do? And again, this all comes from raising the right kind of people. I think that this is, again, looking too short term. It gets away from and misunderstands the fact that we basically need to be building families and then raising people in the correct way. I think that his move towards creating, say, like the academic agency is really positive, because it's a way to get an unpaused version of education into the minds of people who are interested, who will then hopefully spread that kind of knowledge around, and that way of living. It's also thinking kind of really short term. Again, it takes around a generation even to start seeing the impacts of changes that you make today. And so the idea of just kind of plonking this society down and just hoping that it will run itself is I think, given that the kind of people who are going to be joining it, whilst they may have the best of intentions, are still kind of clueless. Like, this is the biggest thing. Like, I don't see that we have this enormous grassroots movement of like people with the enormous diverse set of skills that we need to make such a community within function in the first place, who are also going to be completely on board with like every single diktat coming down from the top, and that they're going to make their peace with that, and just kind of get on with things. I'm a butcher and I'm going to run my butcher shop, and everything else can be dealt with by everyone else, is kind of throwing off the responsibility for your community as well in many ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so you said a lot of things there, but I mean, one thing he would say, I think, in counter to that is, you might return the shopping cart even though there's no law forcing you to do it or compelling you to do it in some way. But the fact that you would return the cart is sort of a side effect of other moral laws in place that influence you to do that. But again, I would say there that might be so, but there is an actual organic relationship. It's not entirely top down, and this is described in the elite theory that we look at, right? It is top down, but there's also a necessary bottom up component for the elites to actually remain in power. And so there has to be an organic process here, right? I guess the thing is, we're kind of talking about a fantasy in some way, because there's not just going to be a Trumptonshire. You actually have to get there organically, which is why I focus on the family first. And presumably you would build up like communities or something, and then like maybe one would become it. But in terms of the positive vision, is that what we're aiming for, right? Like, I think about to me, like radical liberation is like the ideal model, right? I mean, he has a well-run family, and he's also not a Luddite, right? I mean, he hasn't destroyed all this technology. He has technology. It is limited, but he's not living entirely separate from the modern world. I mean, he at least was like a programmer, right? So I mean, he's more or less he's integrated into society without becoming subsumed by it. And to me, that's the model we should be going for, right? I mean,
you live in the world but apart from it. And again, that's another kind of common Christian phrase. Just because.
So can we scale up Radlib? That's what I mean. Like,
can we scale up Radlib, who's living his best life right now? It comes down to a question of like the values, and I think a lot of people, especially even the people in our communities who are sort of following us because they're interested in these questions, but haven't necessarily got it. We are missing a generational kind of passing down of moral values that has yet to that took generations to emerge and has disappeared really rather rapidly. And in the face of technology and in the face of, I suppose, like just this rapid expansion of borders where the world now seems incredibly small, but we're also incredibly distracted by questions on a scale which we were never able to deal with. It's like, oh, there's this big climate change. Again, I bring up the climate change thing just because it's like one of the great social engineering projects of our time, where people are told that the world is going to end. And not just is the world going to end, but like you're in some way directly responsible for it. And then also there's nothing you can really do because, it's the blame is placed in very large, rather vague hands, right? Even if you can point to something as specific as China, right? Like that's still an abstraction in and of itself. It's quite vague. And we also have, we can see this in all sorts of conversations which are coming up in the last few years, the whole like diversity and representation thing. Like these are all things where the vast majority of people are making decisions for themselves based on their own personal experience. And that's just the way that they operate. It's not, and they're being forced to go through a form of social engineering where they have to reject their better judgment with regards to how they make these decisions in the interest of the greater good. And I say that with sarcasm, obviously. So what we have lost is this localized perspective, but I don't think that the answer to that is to ignore the fact that people are pulling are machinating. So there are ways to rebel, there are ways to get around these different issues which don't require us to essentially start from scratch again somewhere else, where we're eventually going to get run over by people who, if we cause too much of a stir, if it becomes too popular, people are actually going to take notice and then get rid of us on the quiet, usually.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the problem with like trying to get to Trumpton as a goal, because that's something that gets noticed and you kind of don't want to get noticed, right? I mean, you want to work your way through whatever is happening right now, whatever word we want to use for it, without getting destroyed, right? I mean, if you bring too much attention to yourself, they destroy you. So how do we survive the current regime? I mean, if you're thinking like, I don't know, let's just, again, like Soviet Union's a really good example, right? I mean, did people try to like, let's just pick like the Volga Germans. Did they try to like rebuild their community like under, I don't know, Khrushchev's nose or something? That's just kind of not how you go about getting through a totalitarian level regime. Is you don't try to like build where it can obviously see you. I mean, it's just it scales up to a point where that's just not going to be tolerated, right? So I mean, to me, I view Trumpton, like if I have to come up with a Trumpton, to me it's like this decentralized thing that actually necessarily leverages modern technologies, like potentially even cryptocurrencies, right? And I've even talked about this before, I think on a cigar stream, where to me the positive vision is we have to be realistic and we lean into the advantages we can get from modern technology, which are actually enormous. I mean, because like again, I referenced Luke Smith. I mean, you can very easily go off the grid now and maintain a entirely modern standard of living, which is actually good because that gives you power, right? I mean, literally power in terms of electricity, but also because it frees you up to do things other than, just farming or something, right? I mean, so.
Well, I would look at it in terms of, would almost sort of people talk about taking over political parties. I know Sargon was very keen on the idea of like taking over either the Conservatives or the Liberal Democrats or something like that a few years ago, and I think that the spirit of that was well intentioned, but the scale of it was ill-informed, right? I think you need to start very much so in your local community. Now, this is much more difficult in the cities, but in terms of like actually engaging with the local community and culture means actually going out and doing that. I think it means going out and joining council meetings. I think it is trying to get ourselves into positions of meaningful authority on a local level first, so that you have the capacity, in effect, to reject some of the top-down kind of diktats of degeneracy which come out from particularly urban centers, but obviously the wider political system as well, because it's the only thing as well which is going to kind of force political change as well, is that politicians, for instance, play to their bases, and you have to become a base essentially. And at the moment, we are a decentralized network. We are fragmented. We are across the country, but we're also obsessed with these kind of pseudo battles online, which don't really do anything. The equivalency on the left is like the support for Jeremy Corbyn in this country on Twitter in the run up to the last election, and the fact that they're already celebrating victory because they've built this kind of decentralized online community, and then of course they lost because they hadn't put in the groundwork. Whereas the people who got Jeremy Corbyn into power did do that groundwork, and they have made the efforts to basically build their underground movement that then takes positions of real power and has real influence with real people. And we are missing that influence with real people. At the moment, we're limited to conservative commentators and occasionally political pundits and the utterly paused GB News over here.
Yeah, well, I would disagree with some of that because I don't really think participation in the political system, even at a local level, is really useful. I would say though that
it's not about participation. It's about control, and we at the moment have no control.
I think even if you enter into the formal mechanisms of the government, you still don't actually get any control any more than Trumpton would. I mean, the control is just an illusion that can remain for a time until someone actually decides to bother with you. I mean, I think the control factor is just doing things privately as opposed to through the state. I mean, you mentioned like academic agency earlier. I mean, we can live basically the way we want without actually having to, control any sort of state mechanisms. I mean, I don't really think that's the way to go. In terms of politics, I mean, I've said this before. I think what needs to be done is the whole system needs to be restructured.
Because you say it like that, I say, well, you've got two options then. Like the first is that you build a consistent, value-led group of people who are operating effectively within the current within the current system and waiting for it to eventually implode, or you have to basically create that system from the ground up as you move up through the institutions in order to create a new system of elites. And I don't think that just waiting for the system to collapse, especially given that we are in a period of kind of a sort of stagnation, because even the borders which currently exist are relatively static historically, right? I just don't see that they won't prop up even the illusion of these things that are still existing. Even if the UK was to become completely shattered, like there's no goodwill between any of its member states. It doesn't function on a governmental level because everything has been like devolved so far. And at the same time, London is still ruling everything with an iron fist. Like they'll still call it Great Britain, right?
Well, I don't think implosion or just waiting for it is that's not what I'm prescribing. I mean, I'm saying that basically what we want to do is elect away the oligarchy by electing a monarch and get rid of it, right? So I mean, we want to actually take part in restructuring the system from the top down in a complete sense, and not use this sort of like incrementalist Fabian strategy that you sort of leaned into there. I think that's sort of the ultimately useless treadmill. So it's not that we're like going to just like wait around and sort of just kind of hide, which I think is kind of what like Trumpton is, right? Is it's sort of just the like wait it out vision, which I think the ability to wait it out is important because you could fail. I don't think Trumpton is the way to wait out the regime, but I think we actively want to like flip the entire thing. We don't want to. I guess like Trumpton is like thinking actually too small in a way. We want to think big, as in referendum, right? I mean, this has actually happened before, and like the UK has referendum systems, right? Like, what you want is to just use the democratic power on the right while the right still has it in terms of its middle class constituents, and simply vote for a chief executive officer who will get rid of the oligarchy. I mean, that's the thing that needs to be dealt with. That's the elephant in the room. None of the other solutions are actually any real solution, because you still have this ultimate sovereign who can just destroy you whenever you want, right? If we're not governed, we don't want to be governed by lunatics. To me, like that's the whole goal. Like I don't even. To me, the whole like we want to create local communities. That's like something we would like to do, but to be able to actually have any confidence that we can do anything, the globalist regime has to be replaced by something. And if we're not primarily trying to figure out how to do that, it's kind of just all pointless. I mean,
well, to my mind, then, but I feel like your vision is also then tied into. I mean, we may sort of disagree on some of the implementation, but it's less about a positive vision as much as generating a heroic vision, especially for the youth, because you need to be able to generate people who have this kind of heroic character, which people are going to recognize, generate leaders in our time, essentially, in order to people who are going to be able to rise up and generate that kind of interest. I mean, I don't think we have any of those kind of figures on the right. I mean, certainly the left has their own version of it. I mean, they would consider people like, even like cultural icons like David Attenborough to be like a part of their heroic vision. Like even Greta Thunberg was put up as like a modern day Joan of Arc. Right?
Yeah, I think all this. See, I know some people like this stuff, but I think all this heroic vision and even like positive vision stuff in general is kind of just pointless fantasy. I mean, again, we are governed by lunatics. I would like to not be governed by lunatics. I would like to be governed by sane, responsible people, please. And this is really just the message that people need to hear. And I'm optimistic about this right now because, like I said, I think the whole like elect a monarch through democracy angle that Curtis Yarvin's been coming from is actually starting to make real waves among the fringes of conservative outlets, and even making its way onto, like I said, Fox News, right? So I'm actually, I don't see the need for these like romantic, heroic characters. I just see Americans need to be given permission to vote for a dictator, basically, which is actually an entirely normal thing for people to do. And to me, it looks like the mechanisms are basically in place to have that happen. It's just a matter of continuing to push down this line, which I was very black-pilled on. But as I said, there are a couple of things that I notice happening in the last couple of weeks, even with this idea sort of entering the mainstream more. That I think it's actually it's pretty clear that we should push on this right now, and that's the thing we should be pushing on, and not some fantasy about to me it's like the left has like gay luxury space communism or whatever, and like what we have like the feudal village. But these are all just myths, right? This isn't political action.
There's like we used to like the right didn't really necessarily need, especially the religious right didn't necessarily need superheroic figures because they already had one in the Christ-like figure, right? And we've also kind of like substituted a kind of modern day heroic figure, like the last great heroic right-led figure in this country, because it's just my frame of reference. Like we have Winston Churchill, and then the highly polarizing character of Margaret Thatcher. Like those are the only two.
Those two were not enough like Hitler. I mean, that's sort of the problem is when I'm talking about electing a monarch, I'm not talking about electing your next PM or president. I mean, when Hitler was elected chancellor, and then his party, which didn't even have a majority, basically took over the Reichstag, that wasn't a normal election. So I'm not talking about having a normal election, right? I'm not talking about electing Trump 2.0. I'm talking about you literally have a guy who like campaigns on this platform that I'm putting forward. That's not my platform, but I'm explaining this platform to you, where what the president or prime minister, or probably in the UK just the monarch, would do is their aim would be to explicitly dismantle entirely, restructure the entire regime from starting point zero, and that would just be what people are voting for when they vote for this person. And if you can get a majority to vote for this, then it's history demonstrate that this is possible. I mean, this even happened in Egypt during the Arab Spring, right? I mean,
sure, but how do you get around the fact that we have this monomyth that we are absolutely terrified, certainly in Europe, of the electing the next Hitler, for instance?
Well, you just you don't put it in that frame. I kind of did that to be funny, but I mean,
it doesn't matter if, like, just the idea of giving anyone this kind of universal mandate to do whatever they want is essentially like taboo across all of European society.
Well, people are. I don't really think it is taboo, honestly. I think it's framed that certain people are not allowed to do that. But I mean, literally right now we have this thing going on where Biden was suspending the right to evict, right, which is just kind of, people are saying it's blatantly illegal, and yet he's just doing it anyway. I mean, people are actually totally comfortable with this sort of thing. There's just sort of like, as it's been called, the boomer truth regime that's keeping people's mind in the box of, you can't vote for like the right-wing version of this, even though there are plenty of good examples of why it's actually totally cool to do that. And, again, we don't want to put too much trust in polling data, but the polling data I've seen and the general reaction to what happened with Trump, I mean, conservatives in America are signaling more and more that they're actually okay with doing something like this. They just need to be given permission to do it, right? And the giving of that permission, all it is just someone explaining it to them that this is possible and it's actually okay and you're not a bad person. And like even someone like Tucker Carlson like can give that permission, right? Because ultimately people are just sort of led around by whatever elites happen to be leading them.
But again, it has to be like the way it's sold to people is still through that heroic caricature. I mean, even Biden saying like you can't evict, right, is reminiscent of the class struggle. It is the landless versus the landlords, the evil, oppressive landlords who would throw you out on the street to starve. We're going to protect you by doing that. Like, I don't think that you can divorce. I mean, like something as simple as I want to be ruled by sane people doesn't seem to me to be enough, as it were.
Yeah, I guess the problem is our countries are about to descend into becoming, Brazil or Venezuela. And it's like you can either go for the one big move and win, or you can try these small incremental things and look, then we're just Brazil, right? I mean, like there's the trajectory is very clear right now, I think, where we're headed in very short time if we don't leverage the one out that still exists in our supposedly democratic countries, right? I mean, that's kind of my problem with this like enclave solution in general, like things like the Amish and Indian reservations. They only exist as like legacy things, right? You can't really make a new one with any faith that it's actually going to be allowed to continue. And again, the whole country is just going to descend into Brazil. You're not going to be safe, right? You literally look at South Africa.
Even if it is allowed to continue, in many ways, like no enclave in the UK, for instance, succeeds really. Like, apart from the ones who are, actually actively currently running the country, these enclaves, whether or not they're based on ethnicity or religion or whatever, are generally not doing particularly well at the moment. I want to just take us back onto sort of the AA videos, because I think it's important as well to avoid like trying essentially within this hour to come up with like a completely viable vision, positive or otherwise, for how things are going to go, even if it's something we think about a lot. He made the video today, Final Thoughts on Positive Vision, where he equated the kind of, even though a lot of people were kind of, I think, sympathetic to the spirit, at least, of his Trumpton video. I think that he's demonized his entire audience now as Tony Blair adherents, which I found to be also quite ridiculous. I think it's more to do with this, and it was like the four freedoms of the EU. He said, like, you're totally in tune with the four freedoms of the EU, etc., etc. I don't think that that's necessarily true, but it was also a case of like lack of education. So like most people have absolutely no idea, or at least only the skeleton of idea of how they want things to do. They know what they like personally. They know how they've been raised, but they don't. But they're craving something with more meaning, and they don't know where to find it. And I think it's wrong to just assume that people are so inflexible that they should just go and apply for a job at the Institute for Change.
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak for myself, but I mean, I've definitely made a lot of I don't even want to call them sacrifices, I guess, improvements, just like in my personal life, in advancing towards what I envision as like a proper person should be doing, right? I mean, so I'm directionally moving away from that, just in how I actually run my own affairs, right? I mean,
yeah. I still think that the key to it all is in the youth, and by youth I mean like anyone up to the age of, like, I suppose 30, and people above that who are interested in trying to make a change in the lives of people in that age bracket, because they are the kind of the next generation of people who are going to raise the next generation as well. So like I see movements like the basket weavers, for instance, which will hopefully be getting a kind of refresh and a relaunch at the end of this month with the event and everything, as like really positive movements, because before you can even entertain the idea of like doing anything, that you need to build people with the kind of skill sets that you want like on a personal level. I mean, for yourself, you want to feel competent, you want to feel capable, you want to feel like you're able to be in control of your own life before you could even do a thing. I mean, to go even Jordan Peterson, whatever you think of him, like, put your own house in order, etc. But a lot of people just don't know how to do that. There's a reason we're in this massive mental health crisis, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult. I mean, I'll just point out some like actual improvements, right? That sort of demonstrate the direction that there isn't just the Trumpton direction and the Tony Blair direction, right? Like there are other things. I mean, so for me, right, like I no more fucking Marvel movies or whatever, right? Like I don't do that anymore. I used to be really into Star Wars, as people would know, who've watched the channel for a long time. I don't do that anymore. Let's see what else. I do gardening. I was going to go weed my garden right now while we do this video, but I actually do practice the carrot pill stuff to some extent. I mean, it's been a long time coming, but I go to church every Sunday this year. I mean, these are just things I'm doing. Healthier lifestyle in general, that's a tough one, but I mean, I do even only this year, I also started this. My brother finally convinced me to start doing martial arts, so I'm doing that now. I do weightlifting, no more pornography, right? I mean, all these things are directionally, away from the Blairite, Coomer, Bugman vision of the world. And I mean,
it's also it also makes your life so much richer, just in general because of it. Like, people forget that, like, whilst the path of least resistance might be cooming and sitting there and enjoy your marble and your slop, that when you break free of that and you help other people to break free of that as well, that it is a much more desirable way of living, and that you need to, again, like, be the exemplar of that. You doing these things is hopefully is going to draw other people to you who are like either because you're encouraging them yourself to come along and to enjoy that kind of lifestyle, or just because, like, they can see the results, and you're also going to become a more productive member of society in general. It's going to be more attractive in terms of, like, finding partners, friends, whatever. And then when you come to raise your children, you're going to be more capable of doing so, and doing so in a way which allows them to also have an easier time of it, because, like, the path of least resistance in terms of consumption is not the path of least resistance in terms of functioning.
Yeah, well said. I guess let's go ahead and get into the next video if you want.
Yeah, like, so it's, I mean, I think we've said
we've preempted a lot of it, but I think we actually we should look at it.
I should probably take a look at it. In fact, I will flash it up on screen, and
yeah, I mean, I guess I'll say this one was a really weird video. I mean, sometimes we have these conflicts, I guess, like the carrot pill was one of them, and we sort of fight things out. I mean, we're really disagreeable, right? I mean, everyone is. We criticize each other pretty relentlessly, but it's always, meant in.
It's in the spirit of growth, right?
It's in the spirit of good faith, and also just really, testing the ideas. I mean, usually the way these things go is, we have the back and forth, and then, like, more serious developments happening. So, like I said, I'm working on an actual response now, and I'm sort of done, like, picking apart and, just being, like, really, what is the word? Critical, right? I mean, that's sort of like a thing that happens. So, hopefully he isn't taking that too personally, because kind of feels like what happened in this video.
AA take things personally. No, he doesn't do that. So it's all good. I think we're all still friends at the end of this. All right. Let me know if you can't hear this, but I'm going to start playing this now.
Imagine a boot stamping on a human face.
I learned a lot this past week about people on the so-called right. I learned that despite what they may say, most are wedded to a vision of unalloyed technological change at any and all costs. They are wedded to a vision of prosperity, which is to say economic growth, above all else. Because, you see, we must be competitive.
Yeah, so if you want to stop there, I mean, obviously that's just not true, right? I mean, we're not for growth above all, and we're not wedded to sort of like unlimited technological advancement. We acknowledge that there must be some degree of competition with the outside world. Just that's how human civilization works, right? I mean, you have to deal with the fact that the rest of the world exists, and it's not like we're for technological growth per se. It's just this is happening, right? This is happening.
I think a lot of people as well are really unclear on what they're actually for. Like, they know what they don't like and they know what they don't see, but it's actually really hard to be creative and to think, especially when you've got very little base, right? Like, let's say you're person who's come from a broken home, you're a guy, you're in your mid-20s, you're struggling to find work, etc. You're a bit miserable, you don't want to live the bugman life, but what's your alternative? You don't really know. You've also been filled with all of these posed messages through your education and whatever, that you have a particular way of looking at the world. I think it's very insincere, shall we say, to point at people who are searching to try and find their way in the world, and to basically just call them out on something which they haven't made a decision on.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm really confused with the whole need for this positive vision in general, just because to me it's really simple. I mean, my positive vision is basically just Radlib. I mean, I've had the advantage of actually meeting Radlib, but I really don't see what more you need than to model your life after what he's doing. Honestly, especially because that's actually achievable, right? You can do that. You can't do Trumpton, right? That's not a thing you can achieve. So why would you not want this concrete achievable thing to make your positive vision?
It's a little bit different over here, where it's a lot more expensive to get to try and do the Radlib thing, right? So
that's fair, yeah.
But as I say, I think this is just a bit of a straw man here.
Animating spirit and mantra, it seems, of our people. I have learned that far from being enemies to the rightest vision of the world, the EU's so-called four freedoms are actually the values held most sacred by right-wingers across the spectrum.
Again, this is a really poor analogy, just because the four freedoms held sacrosanct by the EU, for instance, are not actually what they it's a complete hypocrisy. It's not what they actually do. I think somebody posted within minutes of this video a breakdown of how these are actually kind of implemented in policy. So it's they have the freedom to create goods, to create services, right? As long as 65% of people agree that they're a moral good and stuff like that. It's the principle of the freedoms as well, the ability to be free, to buy what you want, to go where you want, to set up a business where you want, etc. is I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but in terms of actually implementing them, and the ways in which they're implemented, where they're used as rhetoric for a much darker agenda, is just completely moving the goalposts, right?
Yeah, I think they're also they're missing, I guess, half of the equation. It's not wherever you want; it's where you want, and also what other people are okay with you doing with, right? Which is the problem we have in the U.S. is we have you can do whatever you want, but you don't actually have freedom of association. So you're kind of just forced to do business based on everyone else's personal whims. So and we're not for that. We're not for you can just go wherever you want and do whatever you want and place business wherever you want. But
this is the other. It's not without caveats, in all regards. So in terms of the pure vision, again, it's a heroic vision, which is incorrect just because it's, again, an abstraction. It's a simplification. It's oversimplified. And
I was just obviously it's almost a tautology. I mean, obviously, if you're going to do business, you're always going to be doing it where you want, kind of by definition in Austrian economics, right? I mean, if you're choosing to do business, you're doing where you're doing it where you prefer to do it. So I mean, I don't even understand. Obviously, wherever you go, you're going where you want. So the idea that, I don't know, I guess maybe I'm getting too in the weeds here, but it's people are always going to want to do things, and there are particular reasons you might restrict those. And I mean, I agree. We don't want, Apple, for example, famous for moving its stuff to China and then selling into the U.S. We actually don't want that to happen. So we don't want, I'm definitely for a certain level of protectionist model. We don't want people just, domestically, let's say, we don't want pornography companies, right? So you might want to do that, but you're not allowed to do it. The EU would allow you to do it, right? So I'm not for the EU's freedoms. I'm not for you can do universally whatever you want. You can do some things that you want.
Look, AA is crowing in the chat because he's like, they literally agree. They agree with my perspective. I don't think that's true, because again, it takes away again the personal level of it. Like when it says something like freedom to move around, etc. It's like that depends on like where that person wants to move around to and that sort of thing. Like there's a whole moral framework. Like this isn't incompatible with like the milkman who has the son who is also going to grow up to be a milkman, and his expectation and his want is that he will be a milkman, right? Like that person is not going to want to move. Like this is he's misconstruing and misappropriating this idea of like people wanting to go everywhere, eat and drink everything, imbibe everything, try everything, and kind of buy and sell anything, right? And like and taking that and saying, right, well, that person who basically sort of exhibits the deadly sins of gluttony, lust, and sloth, that's the person which all of the right are. Like I don't agree with that at all. Like,
it's just bizarre. I mean, you're free to move where you want on your property, right? I mean, if you're the milkman. I guess you have the cow. Do you have the cows? I don't know, but let's say you're the rancher who supplies the milkman. I mean, are you free to move about on your ranch? I mean, well, of course you are. I mean, it doesn't really make any sense to say.
Yeah,
like you're not free to stand over here or something. I mean, even
in his like Trumptonshire vision, where like and people in the chat also seem to be like assuming that there would only be like one child per family. Like if the son doesn't want to be a milkman, is he rejected by the family? Where it's like you only need one son to carry that on, right? Like and then the rest can do other things. Like that's different.
Yeah, maybe you would subdivide things. I don't really know. But yeah, I mean, we're probably spending too long on this. I mean, we don't agree with the EU freedoms because the EU freedoms fundamentally allow they don't allow any restrictions on behavior at all. And we do want restrictions on behavior.
I don't think that they don't allow for them. I think they just don't account for it in any way, right? So it's a mistake to, it's like somebody who is really overweight who shrinks down and has changed their diet completely. They've not gone on a diet; they've changed their diet, and now they still eat whatever they want, but what they want has fundamentally changed. And so, like the 4 freedoms that the EU advocating here make no account for like personal preference on the amount of each thing that each person wants to do anyway.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you want. Again, pornography is an example. Just ban that. If you want to, I think the freedom of movement thing is like an open borders thing, right? If you want to just come into Trumpton and you're an outsider, right, that should be allowed. You're not free as an outsider to just meander in. You're not free to even commerce with Trumpton, except through like some intermediary, right? So we're in some way we're not for these unrestricted freedoms in all cases.
Yeah. All right, let's crack on.
Technological change, economic growth.
Technological change is inevitable. I'm just putting that out there. Like change in general is inevitable. Like even within the scope, like the people who were the Victorians would say that they were consistently different to the Edwardians, for instance. Like things have changed so much between groups. Like this idea of consistency is a myth.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, like I even pointed out a couple of days ago on Twitter, like when the crossbow was invented, there were attempts to ban it, right? But I mean, that's just not going to happen. I mean, you can't.
He himself has pointed out what happened with the cars and the like the whole trade involving hackney carriages, right?
Yeah, I mean, even like we have like self-driving cars now. That's not going to be banned. I mean, used to have people driving elevators, right? I mean, they tried to go on strike. You didn't ban elevators that weren't piloted by humans, right? I mean, humans on the large scale, they just prefer innovations that benefit them in some way. I mean, it actually is constant. I mean, even though we observe a much higher rate of change now, I mean, it's not actually unique to now.
I mean, one of the reasons we obviously observe a much higher rate of change is simply due to the ease of movement of goods and people and services, right? Like services which are online and therefore instantaneously accessible all over the globe. The movement of goods and people, which comes with the fact that we have planes and we have which are much faster than boats, and we have trains and all sorts of these infrastructure upgrades. Which allow for such things. Which also means, yeah.
Sorry, I'm just excited. I would also say like the past doesn't even exist, right? It doesn't matter that for like 1,500 years or something, things didn't really change very much for the average person. I mean, that might be true, but it doesn't matter. That's not. We don't live in that world. Those are the past. Yeah, we live in the present. The present is the present, whether we like it or not. It doesn't matter. If at some other point in time people experienced more stability, that stability wasn't artificial. That it was real stability, just because that's how the technology and society was developing. But now we've done the Industrial Revolution. Pandora's box has been opened. It can't be closed again. So the references to the past and the stability of the past, it's all unreal to me.
You also have to innovate anyway, because you can't just remain static. Otherwise, you just see what happened in the Age of Empires, right? Like the weaker or less innovative empires just colonize the other ones. Like that's just the way it works. You will, unless you can maintain some kind of unique selling point, as it were, for your civilization, you will inevitably come under the thumb of another, right? You need a source of strength. Moving on.
Everything we enjoy about prosperity and modernity now, only let us be edgy boys and end post. All Netflix movies and television shows and TikTok and anime and OnlyFans and free porn that we enjoy now.
I mean, he's ignoring the fact that like there are huge movements dedicated already to like digital detox, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to do. I mean, I've definitely done it to some extent. I mean, the only video game I've played possibly almost all year. There was one I played earlier, but I mean, I played some Dark Souls, and you saw the extent to me stream that. I mean, I don't even play video games anymore, really. And I watch some movies. It's not like Netflix and stuff. I'm following the Mystery Groove recommendations right now, which I think is culturally enriching. I mean, I definitely spend too much time online and Twitter, but like you say, we recognize these problems. But I think that the difficulty in retracting from them sort of demonstrates the sort of absurdity of actually like trying to build a whole society on this. I mean, it's difficult for any of us to actually do this completely.
Only maybe with a few less foreigners, only maybe with a slightly different tax rate. There's a vision that should appeal to almost everyone on the right, which I'll get to in a moment, given the near blanket condemnation that was given to mine. Let's read in what I said.
See, we don't blanketly condemn it, though. I mean, it's just there are certain fundamental flaws we see with this thing, mostly on the technological angle, and then partially just on the economic system,
and definitely on just a moral value system level, which is something which you can only change organically through time, through essentially projecting those values onto the next generation of people. Because essentially, when psychologically speaking, as people go through life, they build up these different moral lenses through which they view things, and even if they're fundamentally wrong on any of them, like if they've created a moral frame, it's very, very hard to dislodge. Even if you talk about when I talked to Peter Hitchens, for instance, and he talks about his movement away from communism, he was like, this came at like a great deal of personal pain for himself because it was so ingrained in him. And that's true for lots of people on lots of levels, and actually very few people have the wherewithal to challenge themselves in that way because it is a destructive and painful process. So you kind of have to get them young, as it were.
Yeah, and I mean, here's where the big straw man's about to happen, where he just flips this. Like, basically, he makes this mission statement, and then he sets up his solution to it.
As a mission statement, to build a self-sustaining local community with traditional values. And let's invert it and see what we get. To build a self-sustaining global community with modern values.
I was pointed out he actually didn't completely invert it there, because self-sustaining should be inverted too.
Self-destructive.
Shouldn't it be destroyed to destroy a whatever? I'm just being cheeky now.
Visit my basic assumptions, which were these, and let's again invert them. Global networks are good. Global is better than national or local. Wasteful is better than sustainable. Modern is better than traditional. Let's turn that third one back around in the interest of...
So he's having to caveat himself as well. But yeah.
Fairness, since nobody sensibly would agree that wasteful is better.
Yeah.
Imagine this, like, again, like this idea of like would sensibly agree. Like, this is again just a massive, like, it's just a pointing towards his thought process, which is oversimplifying a lot of the decisions that people make.
Well, do you actually disagree with the premise? I wouldn't even put that premise as like my primary vision, I guess. I mean, like I said, my primary vision is not to be governed by lunatics.
Well, it's like if we go back to the original one he's got here, which is like community is good, and it's like, well, what kind of community? Like, again, that's a point of abstraction, because like you can have a community of pedophiles, and that would be
well, I guess we should probably take this in good faith, at least. I mean,
okay, yeah.
I mean, if you go back to the original mission statement, I mean, I agree that this is a good thing and something we want to do. But obviously there are potentially infinite permutations about how you go about this. And he basically, what he's done is basically said, if you're not for this one, then you must be for the globalists, basically. But I don't really see how that follows, because
it's very friend-enemy distinction, isn't it? Like,
yeah, I mean, surely there are multiple ways to build a self-sustaining local community with traditional values that aren't all 100% trumped, right? I mean, surely he's not stumbled upon the perfect one solution to this problem, right? But
no one has either, and like this idea of that everything is harmonious as well is like, and was at this particular period of history is somewhat I think ludicrous. Like, people are still people, they're still catty, they're still prone to their own vices, etc. Like, the difference is that you are dependent on your local community for things which you now no longer have to be dependent on them. Like, you would maintain a good relationship with your greengrocer and your butcher and your car mechanic or whatever, because you have to live with these people, you have to contend with them, they're down the pub because you've only got one pub, etc. And now it's like we have this, you don't have to maintain, there is no pub landlord because it's all a Weatherspoons, and you don't have to do this because it's all supermarkets and that sort of thing, right? Like, you don't have the same interactions now that you did then. And like, yeah, I just think it's reductive, to say the least.
And see what we get. To build, and let's revisit my basic assumptions, which were these, and let's again invert them. Global networks are good. Global is better than national or local. Wasteful is better than sustainable. Modern is better than traditional. Let's turn that third one back around.
Like, they won't even use necessarily this language. It's like global networks are good.
I think the globalists would say that, or the internationalists, however you want to say.
Possibly, although, yeah, I don't want to get too tied down in the minutiae of the semantics, but it's like, Yeah, so much of this stuff is neutral to me. It all depends on, like, when I say neutral as well, like I would say it tends towards bad, just because anything of that size tends towards corruption.
I guess just on the first one, I mean, we literally have a global network of, I guess, dissidents or whatever you want to call it. I mean, that we're participating in right now. So is this?
Yeah, the British
bad?
Empire was a network. Like,
so yeah, I mean, you know, I think I don't think that's what he's thinking of in these statements, but I think that just points out that this inversion isn't well thought out enough.
Again, like, modern is a synonym at the moment for, like, progressivism, so like change and progress, etc. And then you got, like, traditional, but traditional is difficult as well. I mean, like, you can even take individual townships and counties, and, like, we have arguments in this country about whether or not, like, a Devon or a Cornish cream tea is best. Like, the idea of what's traditional changes in different areas, and like, even on a really small scale, even town to town. So I find it difficult to, as I say, deal with this as a basic assumption anyway.
In the interest of fairness, since nobody sensibly would agree that wasteful is better, and let's look again at my normative goals. Remember, to prevent nomadism and so on, and let's invert them, which means to promote nomadism, to promote social and technological.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, I actually I tend to agree with his premises and also the normative goals. I mean, I think nomadism is something to be prevented. We do live in a too nomadic culture where people do not put down roots, and this actually prevents the communities from building. So we need people to actually put down roots and remain in a place, and it needs to be the right place. So
it also needs to be fairly early. I mean, again, if I just look at my parents, for instance, it was very much the norm that you had this, like, in terms of nomadism, you left home at 18, you found a job, and then you found a wife or a husband, and you, although if you're a woman, you're more likely to stay at home until you found a husband, and then you got married, and you were perhaps like 22 at that point. Like, it's not like, the difficulty that we have is that nomadism is promoted like above and beyond, like, this initial phase, like, which is very short. Because you need to have, like, a short period of nomadism in order to kind of establish your independence from your family unit as a kind of source of support, so that you can, like, kind of test the waters. You can support yourself, and then once you can support yourself, you put down the roots, and then you do support yourself. So again, it's all a question of scale.
And of course, some nomadism would happen in Trumpton as well. As we said, like, it is possible to, like, change your career, right? There are penalties, but it's possible.
Yeah, it's sometimes necessary, especially if you've been made redundant or whatever. And then we've got here, to promote social and technological changes that irreparably disrupt the structures of everyday life and destroy local communities, which I find strange as well, because, like, the elites as they are at the moment are, like, relentlessly pushing the promotion of specific local communities, usually on the grounds of race, at the expense of others. So it's, like, even more kind of insidious than he's putting out here. Like, they actively promote colonialism of of our homes in order to reduce the majority population. Like, that's not in question.
Yeah, I mean, to hear to this point, I mean, the primary problem here is the social disruption that's actually happening on purpose, right? I guess one of the weird things here is that I'm confused about is this. It's almost at odds with his criticism of the cathedral he had the other day, where Moldbug kind of used this as an, like, automatic process. He seems to be viewing this disruption and degradation as, like, an automatic result of technology. But no, we know that the elite are intentionally disrupting our society, mostly through ethnic and religious rearrangements and mixing. Right, this is a purposeful thing that's being done to harm us.
Yeah.
It's not a natural, necessarily natural result just of technological change.
He's also kind of, again, ignoring the fact that there are movements. I mean, like, it's been talked about for years, the fact that social media employees don't let their kids use social media, and the fact that there are these groups which are taking off sort of now, these kind of counter social media groups, or like just people who refuse to engage with it, right? Like this kind of technological detox movement, which can come without basically sacrificing all of the advantages that technology does provide in other regards, right?
Yeah, and like I said, the Amish do use some of the stuff like phones, and they're not being destroyed by it because they're maintaining the cultural consistency of their society. They're not being socially engineered, and it's not even top down in that case. It's actually a very organic process in Amish culture that's actually holding it together. So it's like clearly there's a way. I mean, I guess technology could destroy a community if allowed to progress too quickly. So there are probably cases where we want to relent or restrict certain disruptive technologies if we have good reason to believe that allowing it to develop too quickly or introduce too quickly would cause problems in the community. But I think he's kind of viewing all change as destruction, but I don't really think that's true.
It depends on how it's approached as well. It's like as if, like, obviously the big problem is that older generations are less adaptive than younger generations, right? When it comes to exploiting these new technologies in ways in which the older generation can't even imagine. Like the porn issue is like one of these big things, right? Where the ability to access hardcore pornography is something which adults can't even really adapt to, or parents rather, because like it doesn't matter if you put a content blocker on your computer, the kid will find a way around it, or they'll go to a friend's house and find a way. Like there's all these different loopholes, and saying that technology has destructive potential is fine, but it's not inevitably destructive. Like,
well, otherwise we should probably all be nuked,
good
right?
Moral values in, as I say, in the next generation, in children, trying to raise people in the right way, like however futile it may feel at the time, because when you teach someone the way, when they're old, they don't depart from it. Like you come back. There used to be the saying, when I was 19, my parents knew nothing, and when I was 21, I realized they knew a lot. They knew everything, right? Like it was, every child will rebel, but the idea is that you instill decent enough values that they come back to it and use it as a moral framework later on, and that you don't obfuscate that and pass that responsibility on to a third party who have no control effectively over what values they're instilling in your kids.
And most people just aren't going to, this will never just work organically. Like you do need some sort of top-down structure to correctly incentivize or coerce people to actually use technology correctly, to form local communities correctly, right? So it's not just like if you leave people to their own devices, they're not just going to do this organically. But I don't think that I don't think the full prevention of technology like past the mid 20th century is actually the necessity here. Like, sure, you'd probably ban the internet in terms of you wouldn't let children access the internet at all. You'd probably have like an intranet, right, a computer network. But as long as you had an isolated network, which is totally doable. I mean, you could have Super Mario or something, right? You could have a Nintendo. You could have your own.
You could have
your own. I mean, I actually have this with my friends, right? We have like our own streaming platform that we use privately You can set up your own like Plex server and everything, right? You would just do that in your community. So you wouldn't be like getting rid of the technology. You would just be controlling it, which is the correct thing to do. You need systems to control these technologies as they emerge, because you won't actually be able to resist them entirely by basically pretending they don't exist, because they actually do exist, and you want to be able to control them, right?
You want to have a semblance of control, certainly over use cases. Like I have no like moral objection to like banning pornography, like making it illegal, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It should just be illegal to produce it, which is very simple.
You know, in the same way as like it's just even worse, like in terms of regulation than any hardcore drugs, even. So, okay, let's just crack on, because in the interest of time.
Yeah,
and destroy local communities. And now let's remind ourselves of those 4 freedoms that you all love so much, because my God, life would be like North Korea without these.
I think Trumptonshire might actually be a lot more like North Korea than anyone wants, which is a problem. But I mean, yeah, I'm
not going to endorse that, but I just find like his entire tone of voice, and like he's clearly being hyperbolic, you know.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of ridiculous. I mean, obviously, Trumpton would be better than North Korea. Also, not having these things don't necessarily lead to North Korea. I mean, you could reject all the 4 freedoms and definitely not have North Korea.
Yeah.
But we do reject these things. I mean, we can go through them one by one. Free movement of goods, no free movement of fentanyl, free movement of capital. I mean, no Walmart buys all of the pubs in Trumptonshire, right? Okay, so that's 2 of them. Freedom to establish and provide services. No Walmarts in Trumptonshire.
No brothels.
Yeah, free movement of persons. No immigrants to Trumptonshire. So I mean, we're not for these things. So I guess I don't really understand.
Yeah.
The accusation.
Like again, all of these are caveats. It's like free movement of persons is like, if you want to leave, you can leave, but if you want to come in, you need to pass checks. If you want to provide a service, like we either trust the market to kind of allow it to be established, but we also outright ban certain things, especially narcotics, etc. Free movement of capital, anti-monopoly laws, etc., and all that jazz. And then, yeah, as you say, like free movement of goods is the same sort of thing as establishing and providing services, right?
So now we effectively turned my vision around based on all the things supposedly based and red-pilled right-wingers complain endlessly about after calling.
So like, is his version just no movement of goods, no movement of capital, no freedom to provide any services? No one can move. I mean, I don't.
Yeah, no movement of goods outside the community. Like you're not allowed to scale up. But although he did caveat this by saying that there might be some small competition between neighboring villages, but it's like.
Well, but he did say there is movement of goods outside Trumptonshire, right? It has an export market through the customs guy. It doesn't export gold, but there's goods and it imports, right? It's restricted, but it's restricted just like we're saying it would be, where it's not totally free.
Capital is restricted because of Trumptonshire coins.
But it exports, doesn't it export Trumptonshire bucks or whatever? It won't export the gold, but it'll exports goods, and I think it exports fiat. I can't recall, but I believe he said that. And I mean,
and then establishing and providing services comes at the expense of like the community has to agree to it, basically. The mayor has to agree to it.
Yeah,
I think it is. And then free movement of persons, like you can leave, but if you want to buy in, the property has to be offered to everyone else in the township first. So there's like you're playing second fiddle to local people with regards to property.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm not even against the like feudal inheritance system. Even,
No.
you would probably have like the programmers guild, right, as well, that dealt with that domain. Just because I don't think the technological restrictions are a key component here that we would want. But I mean, that's, a lot of the core stuff is not what we have a problem with. It's really a lot of it is the economics and the technology thing,
Now,
Yeah.
which he's not really getting into here.
it just so happens there's someone who has exactly this vision of the world already. I would earmark him as a future leader for the right. So let's take a little listen to him for a moment.
So this is a moment in time when we must remake the case for reason-based politics with the correct analysis of why the world's changing and how we can navigate our way through that change to the advancement of our people and the reignition of the politics of optimism.
So one of the problems here is he's just lying. He's not for the advancement of the British people, right? Like if
he can say whatever he wants.
Imagine Jonathan Bowden saying this exact line. Can we actually go back and imagine Jonathan Bowden saying this? And would it make sense?
So this is a moment in time when we must remake the case for reason-based politics.
But like,
he wouldn't say that. That's the one part that I also agree is disagreeable. He would not say reason-based politics.
It's also his reason, and your reason, if it differs from him, is not reason according to him. Like, that's like
that's also kind of a general statement. I mean, I like to think at least I'm using reasoning skills to,
I'm
give
applying
my
critical
spiel,
thinking.
Right? But in any case, we can continue.
With the correct analysis of why the world's changing.
A correct analysis.
Okay. I mean, duh, of course you want that.
How we can navigate our way through that change to the advancement of our people and the reignition of the politics of optimism.
Let's make our way through and let's have it be good.
Things we take for granted must be re-argued from first principles. Why protectionism is bad.
Okay.
Protectionism is bad. Okay.
Yeah, I disagree on that one.
Yeah.
I mean, it's neutral. I mean, you can definitely overprotect your economy, and as we well know, you can also underprotect it.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, British Steel is a really good example of that, and obviously we have still got ongoing debates over whether or not certain tactics with regards to British Steel were the right ones across our society. So, yeah, it's a neutral statement. Him saying protectionism is bad is incorrect in and of itself.
Why properly managed migration is good.
Properly managed migration is...
I mean, we don't
disagree with that.
I guess is properly managed basically none. Because I essentially agree with Trumpton's immigration policy, which is basically you can't immigrate. I know that there's some amount of immigration allowed, right? Under
maybe 1% or whatever.
But of course, what Blair means here isn't that. He means just bring them all in, right? I mean, but that's not what we're for, though. So
why the technological revolution can bring enormous gains and its displacement impact surmounted. Why the transatlantic...
Again, it's a generality. It can, but it depends on the technology. It depends where it's applied. It depends on how it's applied. It depends how people use it. It depends what that use case is in that community and what potential good it can do as much as what potential bad. And everything is again, vagary. It's rhetoric.
Well, I think there's one key word there that he used, which is technological revolution. And I think revolution is the word we don't want. That's what he's trying to avoid in Trumptonshire. I agree that technological revolution as such, which is, I guess, kind of a vague term, but that could be something that's disruptive. So we don't want technological revolutions occurring in a disruptive way, but technological change in general is going to happen and properly managed. That's fine.
Sure.
Anyway.
And its displacement impact surmounted. why the transatlantic alliance is as relevant today as ever.
The transatlantic alliance is relevant.
I think that's kind of just irrelevant to our POV.
I mean, like AA would say, like the import of American sort of values, but also conflicts is an issue. So, like the whole race grift thing over here, the fact that George Floyd spurred like a UK BLM movement over here seems insane. Just in general, but I mean, it's mainly in economic. But like, I don't think you can get away necessarily from. I mean, unless you want to go completely isolationist, I don't think you can get away with that, especially with the way global defense is currently laid out.
And why globalization is a force driven primarily not by governments, but by people.
Well, by business.
I mean, it's kind of literally driven by business in combination with government at this point.
Not to mention the fact that government is made of people.
Yes, I mean that's kind of a tautology. Like people are driving globalization. Yeah, that's necessarily true.
Please excuse the motorbike outside.
Yeah.
And resisting it is dangerous.
Well, yeah, I would disagree there. I mean, we do want to resist globalization.
And it is dangerous.
Yes,
so,
and it's dangerous.
We accept that.
We perceive there is a danger to our respective societies. American globalization is negatively affecting yours. Yeah, I guess for me, I mean, again, like for Americans, I guess it's more the southern border and then China problem that's affecting us, where it's the economic globalization with our relationship with China, and then the laborers coming in from the border. I mean, in a lot of ways, I guess it is actually really similar, except there's not a big evil empire. We are the big evil empire.
I'm glad you finally come to terms with that, Charlemagne, that you are evil. There you go.
Is strangely unsatisfactory. But in a colloquial sense, we can say it stands for the coming down of barriers of nation, race, trade, and culture.
The coming down of barriers relating to race, trade, nation, and culture.
I mean, we don't want that. I mean, there have to be barriers between what is it? Nation, race, and then what were the other two?
Trade and culture.
Yeah, I mean, there are necessary barriers historically that were in place across all those things for good reason. I don't think we need to deliberate on that point.
No, I mean, like in terms of like trade, you need to balance your own. What's the word? Where you can sustain your economy off of your own goods. I don't know. It's late. It's escaping me. But
yeah, I mean, we can pause less if you need to as well.
That's all right. Like you basically need to balance like protectionism with, like, you don't want to import everything, right? And you don't want to export everything. You want to be in a position where you can look after your own people and that sort of thing. With regards to like race and culture, these are like race, I would say, is much more of an arbitrary characteristic, but like culture is based on communities of people with usually like based around language, and culture is, I mean, very distinct and can be wildly different. And as we know, like two cultures can be either very in keeping with one another and kind of maintain a healthy balance and relationship. I mean, even then there's some friction. I mean, just look at England and France, right? But then you've got, on the other hand, like cultures which are completely incompatible. I mean, I don't think either of us would disagree that, say, like the culture of Pakistan is just antithetical to a Western model, for instance.
Yeah, they're totally separate cultures.
Yeah, like there's a reason they're distinct and separate and not just called the same culture. Okay.
A world coming together mixing more, integrating more.
No. Like, you could appreciate other like differences in opinion. You can even like experimentally like effectively taste. I mean, that's why people go on holiday places, right? But they don't want to live there. That's the whole point. Ugh.
In experience and lifestyle. The forces that drive this process are cheap travel, interconnectedness through technology, which allows us to see how others are living and thinking, which in turn makes migration more attractive.
That's an interesting statement. The fact that, like, I mean, it's very much the case of like the grass is greener, I think, in terms of making travel more attractive. Migration, that is, specifically. And specifically in terms of the West, it is what is attracting a lot of people to us.
Yeah, I mean, we're basically just paying people to live here anyway.
Yeah, but nobody is making the argument that like somebody is looking at the lifestyle in like most people are not looking at profiles from Nigeria and going, this looks amazing, let's all move there. Like, this is definitely a very Western, and to some extent some of the new builds in the Middle East, like Dubai, which are driving people to move these places. It is not a universal thing. It's not that like suddenly everyone has lost their in-group preference and now wants to move everywhere and anywhere.
And the desire on the part of people for quality and inexpensive consumer goods.
Yeah, but look how well that's going.
Government can, in varying degrees, enable or hinder this process. But the idea that government created it or can stop it is fantasy.
Okay, but I mean, the government's literally creating it.
It's facilitating.
I mean, and can literally stop it. I mean, that was like the whole Brexit campaign, right? It's like, I mean, we can stop it and take back control. I mean,
it doesn't matter really what it is. I mean, like Viktor Orban in Hungary banned gender studies. Like that's one thing. Like you can stop it, and I think he's playing off the inevitability angle again, which is different. Like in the sense of, if somebody's going to do it, somebody will do it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't insulate yourself to some extent against, like, especially some of the more negative exports of other nations and your own, to be honest.
But there is no doubt what decades of opening up have done for the world.
Yes, there is no doubt, Tony Blair. You've destroyed so much.
The world has become more prosperous.
No thanks to you.
You don't have to agree with all the commentary in the books by Rosling and Pinker to accept that the facts are clear.
If you want a positive vision for the right, there it is. This vision, in the final analysis, is also your vision. If you want a positive vision for the right, it's TikTok and anime and porn and Facebook and multinational conglomerates and investment banks only somehow based.
I think we've essentially said no to that. I think that's incorrect and reductive.
The anime point always weirds me out. I mean, I play that up a lot as like a character thing, honestly. I think I've seen like one anime this year, and it was like the one Morgoth watched. Do you remember that one with the it was like this weird, almost like fascist city where everything was about shooting these guns. Anyway,
I don't know. No,
just gonna point that out because maybe some people are under the impression that I'm like a weeaboo, but I just play that up because it's funny. I think how mad people get that like anime
sounds like
exists.
you're basically Japanese, mate.
I mean, look, Radlib admitted on Twitter to watching anime literally yesterday, so I don't know.
We'll all be trans by the end of the year.
You want a positive vision for the right, it's Caitlyn Jenner and Milo.
I mean, we're entering levels of absurdity here, I'm afraid.
Nothing must stand in the way of capital P progress, expanding the four freedoms while promoting better and better time-saving technology. Because
But again, this is like everything that these groups and people and even the four freedoms stand for. Like, it's a lie. Like, that's the other thing. Like, none of it's genuine. It's a matter of all intent and no gumption, as it were.
Well, right, because you still have to bake the cake, bigot, right? You don't actually have the right to do the business you want. You know,
Yeah.
you have the right to submit to their will. Like, you know, it's, I mean, the four freedoms aren't even real.
I'm going to bake you a cake and it's going to be amazing, but I'm going to start putting, and then when you look at the ingredients that I'm actually putting into it, you're like, why is there like chili and raw sewage in this? And I'm like, don't worry, look at the cake. Just look at the picture of the cake I'm going to bake you. Like, no. It's like, I don't even want that kind of cake.
as you see in the modern conception, labor is a cost and leisure is a good. While in the traditional conception, work is good in and of itself. In 1933,
I think that's just again, like, poorly constructed. I don't think we disagree that. I mean, that's what underpins a lot of the carrot pill as well. As much as he rejects it, is the fact that we consider labor in and of itself to be a source of satisfaction and meaning and everything. Like, it doesn't have to be growing your own food. Like, it could be upscaling furniture or anything, right?
Well, is this now just an acceptance of the carrot pill? I mean, I feel like that's what's happened here. I'm not even sure. I'm not sure how you could reject the carrot pill in Trumptonshire.
Arthur J. Penty wrote, "Modernism is bankrupt spiritually, morally, intellectually, and politically. And because of this, a reaction towards tradition can only be a matter of time. Meanwhile, the only reason why modernists remain in the saddle is because traditionalists have for so long been on the defensive that they have lost the habit of attack. They do not realize the strength of their position."
I'd agree with that statement generally.
Yeah.
Well, Arthur, it's 2021 now, and from surveying the scene, I can tell you that I'm afraid, no, there is no traditionalism. There is no appetite for tradition. There is only appetite for technology.
People have an appetite for tradition, but they just don't realize it because they don't get the chance to engage in anything traditional. Like, that's the difference. Like,
well, some of them even do realize it on accident. Like, I know a lot of people who sort of accidentally become more traditional just because they sort of figure it out. I mean, I don't think most people will do that, but you know, it is there.
Most people will sit in the pod and wonder why they're miserable, right? Like, but that's different to saying that there's no appetite for it. Like, people have an appetite for it, especially when I mean, like, even again, like, if you take the huge movement of people who rose to the occasion when, like, Jordan Peterson came to prominence, like, these were all people who were rejecting the modern conception of moral values, etc., and saying, like, I just want to change, like, I want to embrace like this different mode of being. I want to be able to know myself better, and I want to be able to move in the world better. And that was playing off a lot of traditional, certainly moral talk, especially given he did this like biblical series, etc. So I just think it's wrong to say there's no appetite for it. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And consumption and economic growth and
people just need to get used to less consumption or different types of consumption.
Because, you know, woe betide, some other nation may have more material possessions than us.
Yeah, that's actually not a problem if other nations have more, but you just have to have a certain level of near parity, right? I mean, you don't have to be out. You don't have to outcompete everyone. You just have to be competitive. You have to be a player on the board, or else you're just at risk of being, you know, manhandled at any point. I mean, kind of like, you know, we brought up North Korea earlier. You know, and again, like, that's kind of an exaggeration here, right? Like, Trumpton wouldn't be like that, but actual North Korea is just like China's bitch, right? I mean, North Korea exists because of China. Basically, it's not
Because
an
China
actual.
allows it to.
Yeah, it's not a real. It's not a real sovereign state in the same way that China or even South Korea, backed by the Americans, is, right? So like, there's tactical reasons why you want to be at least competitive with the outside world. It's why they're developing nuclear weapons, right? So that you can actually maintain. You have some assurance that you can actually maintain your thing. This is just reality.
Even on the so-called dissident right is still line goes up is good, GDP is good, technology is good, leisure is good. So,
well, obviously, we don't think that. I think technology is useful, right? I mean, he
all,
might.
all in moderation, AA.
Let's say he could even be right about technology. I mean, in my opinion, if he's right about technology, we're just screwed because, I mean, the whole world isn't going to give up technology. I mean, if Shire just gives up technology, okay, you're basically just throwing the best weapon ever created on the ground, and then your enemy's just going to pick it up. I mean,
you might be able to even manage it for your lifetime. Like you might be able to live your isolationist dream and enjoy it, but it's not going to last. And that's the issue. You want to build something which is, as he said, self-sustaining, and I just don't see it being self-sustaining.
Let's just smash the computers right now. I mean, if technology's so bad,
no more streaming.
I like that. That's the logical conclusion. Like, if he's correct about technology, then it's just over. So we need to. That's what we have to figure out. You know, he might even be right about technology always being destructive. Even if he is, I mean, I don't think he is, but we'll say disruptive at least. I mean, it's definitely disruptive. That's just something that has to be managed. You have to manage that fact of the world that we live in the world of technology and technological advancement, and any given society that's a serious society is going to have to figure out how to manage that to its benefit, and that's a difficult problem. I think Shire is kind of just sweeping that problem under the rug by saying we'll just not have it, but that's a very short-sighted solution. I think I've learned from Semyagog, I would say, not to just like ignore China. I think there's sort of a boomer-con, neocon focus on China, but that is a legitimate competitor civilization now, right? And I mean, do you want China to just take over everything, basically? I mean, in the long run, that's the inevitable outcome, basically, right? It's like they have the moon is not the Moon King's moon; it's China's moon. Why does that matter to Shire? Well, it's because eventually Shire just disappears into this
like the gaping maw of China.
The gaping maw of this Asian techno world, basically, right? Like that's the inevitable outcome. It's like you're just going to fade away and go out of existence like so many civilizations have had, unless you're constantly competing against that the decay of time and the competition of the other species of human society in the world. You're going to decay away, right? That's why you have to have this competitive nature.
There's always been a kind of quote unquote world hegemon. Like there's always been societies which have dominated and gone back and forth, and we had the age of empires, and I mean, some would say we're still in it now, just in a different sense. And the difference, that the thing that's happened now is like we've reached the global scale, right? Where probably with you had the Mongol Empire, which was like the second largest empire ever made, and it was the largest continuous empire, which was then superseded by the British Empire like 100 years after its downfall, which became the most successful naval empire to ever exist. And then obviously we are where we are now, and we there's nowhere, unless we become multi-planetary, it doesn't really get bigger than this unless they go global government, and that's the thing we're kind of trying to resist as well. So we are in a somewhat unprecedented time where basically the constraints of global reach have been essentially reached, and we don't know quite where we're going to go from here, which is not to say that we won't remain adaptable. But that's another conversation in and of itself. I'm just going to finish this off now because we are over sort of 2 hours, and then we'll hit the super chats and whatnot and carry on.
So many acknowledge the spiritual bankruptcy at the heart of things today, but so few, practically nobody, is prepared to acknowledge that this is fundamentally tied to modernity, with its 4 freedoms and with its open borders and with its open markets and open labor and free-flowing international capital and worship of technology for its own sake, and its thoroughly satanic inversion of traditional values and promotion of vices as lifestyle choices that define one's identity. But ultimately, judging from the many hundreds of comments I have read this past week, this is what you all want. You want to wallow in the mire of our degradation. You wish to become one with the ashes. So my advice, friends, for the more ambitious among you, is to submit your CV to the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change and work there for your own vision of a better future. You know, just like the one Tony Blair wants, only with more racism or something. Right, get out of here.
I think this is just pure projection.
Yeah, well, I mean, projection, I guess, would imply that's what he wants, which I don't really.
He's
definitely projecting again. Like we don't have this view.
It's a caricature. It's a caricature, right? But him talking about. I find it interesting, given that he classifies himself as a subversive who wouldn't want to live in Trumpshire himself. Like I'm sensing that there's just like a part of him which wants to wallow in this sort of thing, and that would like the fact is we all have vices and we all have we battle with ourselves daily anyway in order to try and live our best life. You know, like there's always the part of yourself which is always going to want to lie in bed and not go to work or whatever. Like that's just human existence. And I think that again he's taking the fact that he believes there's no appetite or maybe he doesn't have an appetite necessary to make the vision happen, and it's being projected out onto his entire viewer base. I don't know.
Well, maybe the appetite's not there. It's just because it's not. Maybe it's just not that good of a vision in some ways. I mean,
that's you.
I mean, maybe it's not because the audience is flawed, although they certainly are.
We're all flawed, aren't we?
Maybe maybe the vision's just not that great. Maybe that's why he doesn't want to live in Trumptonshire, because there are things about it that really kind of suck. I guess before we get to super chats, maybe there's a difference in what people want here. I mean, if you just want to live your life in some traditionalist way, what are you even doing here? Just smash your computer, go live in the whatever, and live on a farm. Just go do that right now. If you want to, Trumptonshire is just this weird middle ground. I mean, if you want to actually defeat globalism, global homogenization, the gay, then we're going to have to fix the very top of this thing. We're going to have to turn and restructure the very top of this thing, which Trumptonshire is not doing, right? That's not what it does. So that's sort of my whole problem is you have to, the elephant in the room is the global American empire, the gay, and it must be restructured for that. I mean, that's my goal, right? Is I actually want to get rid of this thing. I don't just want to shelter and hide from it. I mean, I guess if you just want to shelter and hide from it, maybe we're just at odds in terms of what our goals are here. But my goal isn't to just, go live trad life just for me. I mean, it's almost like that almost seems like too selfish. I don't want anyone to be bugmen, right? I don't want there to be bugmen at all. It bothers me if almost all of the entire Western civilization is bugmen, and we just have this tiny, pissant little village somewhere. To me, that's not a win. That's just Western civilization has just been beaten down into a little island, off Venezuela or something. I mean, that sucks. To me, that's not a victory condition we should be aiming for. We should be aiming for the American government needs to be completely restructured so that it's not run by lunatics and it serves the interests of the people. And then Trumptonshire is even possible within that if you want to go further. But you know, to me, Trumptonshire as it's presented is no better than just than any lower resolution than that, because it's ultimately not a real solution to globalism. It's just like throwing up this force field and just trying to hide from it, basically. I don't know. At least that's how I see it. I mean,
yeah, I see it as a you need to have expended all other options before you run away, and I don't think we have expended all other options. Like that's it, and all other options includes almost like literally persecution and torture and all sorts. So yeah, I don't see it as the way forward. Like, it's a great conversation starter, and obviously like my talk at the event is going to be about similar topics, and the whole point of it is to be thought-provoking and to try and get you thinking about whether or not like you have a positive vision, if you even want a positive vision, like how are you going to basically best move forward and why. But yeah, I hope that our thoughts on the matter have been interesting. I'm going to get to the super chats now. So Anakin Cringewalker says NBC is a good case study. Sarnoff used the advent of television and rapidly deployed the tech to reinforce his own institution of nightly news, using his relationship with Eisenhower to be a news king. That was some time ago. I'm trying to remember what that's directly relating to. But it's an interesting story in and of itself. But like, technology being abused is kind of par for the course. Like, the people who are going to exploit technology. But it's also important to note here that even in that story, like, the state plays an integral role, and even if AA creates his own micro state, that state is still open to corruption, to flatterers, and to the people who leverage like something new which comes in. Even if you greatly restrict the amount of new that comes in, like, new stuff is still going to be disruptive, even by his own thinking, right? So, any thoughts, Charlemagne?
Not on that particular super chat.
Cool. Miyaki says, you'll need to have Don on. He's literally working on a small community right now. Yeah, I'm watching the Don's Ranch experiment with great interest. Coney Current Year says, I agree with Charlemagne, bizarrely. There you go. You're a bizarre option to support Charlemagne. And Coney also says, why should we give up on Faustian civilization?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of my view. To me, it's just kind of against the admittingly declined nature of Western man to sort of flee in terror from the technology, as opposed to conquer it and bend it to our will. I mean, maybe there's just not enough energy in our civilization left to do that. But I mean, there could be a restoration. I don't want to run from. To me, it's just a retreat and a fleeing from, this unknown, basically.
It's like hiding from the Star Destroyer by sticking yourself to the back of it. Like, it's not like it's not going to work in the long run. Like, you will, as I say, like, it's not a winning strategy in the long run. That's what I'm.
Because eventually you just end up being amalgamated into the greater whole. Like, you could probably endure for quite a long time.
Even the Amish adopted some technology.
Yeah, I mean, eventually you get integrated into the larger empires and governments. There's just no way around that.
And with that, we come to the end. So thank you very much for joining me, Charlemagne, especially at such short notice. I hope that both AA and ourselves have given you plenty to think about. It's we try and be a little bit of a point of sanity. There's no bad blood between us or anything like that. It's just like the whole thing is an experiment in kind of exploring these ideas, and we enjoy doing that. So if you want to support the Academic Agent or ourselves, then please do so. And don't get too spurgy in the comments on his comments either. So there we go. All right, chaps, going to call it there. Thanks to everyone for turning up. Thanks for everyone who proffered their opinion in the comments, which we were following along with as we went along. And thanks to Charlemagne for joining me. Take care, everyone, and have a great week. Bye-bye.